Hello, everyone. I'm Mohammad Mahdi Hatef. I'm a researcher at Iranian Institute of Philosophy, and I'm gonna talk about social entities, theoretical entities, and realism. Social entities are widely regarded to be subjective, and since subjective matters can hardly be taken as parts of the real world, anti-realism about social entities has been a popular view. This result might look more obvious if we contrast social entities with observational entities as they're perceived in common sense. It means to construct money with a piece of paper or an organization with a building. The difference between these two types is such clear that realism about observational entities and anti-realism about social entities seems plausible. But there's another type of entities which is highly important in science. Theoretical entities like electron or black hole. And the surprising matter about these entities is that they are similar to social entities in several aspects. And it let us think that the stance we take on theoretical entities may have some implications for the stance we take on social entities. In other words, realism and theoretical entities, in our case, may challenge anti-realism and social entities in a way that, prohibits us from keeping both of them. Here, I will discuss this challenge, and by analyzing the way they're similar, I try to find an answer to above question, whether one can be realist about theoretical entities and at the same time anti-realist about social entities. Let us begin with their similarities. And here, three aspects are summarized. First, both types of entities are initially constructed intentionally. In social matters, these intentional construction seems clear. Few people deny that turning a piece of paper to money relies on our conventions and collective acceptance of this entity as money. And persistent being of money also depends entirely on this acceptance to be persistent. Then one may claim that our intentionality contributes essentially to the way social entities exist. In case of theoretical entities, however, it seems less clear. But comparing them with observational entities may help us see the different ways they are. In case of observational entities, we just perceive them as particular entities. But in case of theoretical ones, what we perceived are some effects, and it is us who relate them intentionally to infer a particular entity as a common cause for those effects. The reason that we are interested in these effects is pragmatic and related to what problems we seek to solve. And variety of the notion of atom during history was partially due to the problems we intended to relate to these entities. Then theoretical entities are initially hypothetical entities. And like other hypothetical things, our intentionality is involved. Notice that it is not only a constructivist idea, because this description of a way scientists come with theoretical entities is agreed also by the realists, although he takes further steps to exhaust the intentionality involved. But insofar as the formation of entities are concerned, two types of entities are intentionally constructed. The second similarity is that in social entities, as in theoretical entities, the kind contributes essentially to forming the instances. And kinds, as many claimed, are human constructs. Again, comparing them with observational entities helps in comprehending the similarity. Our knowledge of pieces of iron does not require any knowledge of the kind of iron. The kind of iron is, in fact, formed after some familiarity with pieces of iron and awareness of similarity and dissimilarity relations between the pieces of iron. Regarding theoretical entities, however, the process is vice versa. Our familiarity with the instances of electron will be possible only when the theoretical entity of electron was previously formed and some properties were ascribed, like the type of charge and its magnitude and this spin. So a theoretical entity is then nothing but a carrier of these properties and is recognized by these features. And forming the theoretical entity of electron is indeed forming the natural kind of electron. People who initially talked about electrons implicitly talked about the existence of natural kind of electron, which is uniform all around the world. It was not pointless that Robert Millikan, who measured the charge of electron, worked only on the oil drops. The postulate of an oral resemblance between electrons of all materials, all elements, allowed him to take the result number as the charge of all electrons. Regarding theoretical entities, in fact, the first instance and the kind are both simultaneously. And since then, knowing other instances depends on supposing implicitly their belonging to the kind. The same is true of social entities. These entities are built in form of social kinds, not social instances. We do not think that the first who coined money took a particular object and on the particular object was money. We tend to think that they took a particular class of objects as money. In a similar way, the Facebook user, cryptocurrency, a tax agent initially consisted of a particular class of individuals, objects, and robots, and did not denote exclusively to a particular individual. Forming these entities is associated with forming the kinds of these entities in a way that subsequent instances are understood as instances of that kind based on their belonging to the kind. It means that in both theoretical and social entities, the kind contributes to the constitution of instances, electron as electron. But this is still not a challenge for realism, unless another premise is attached, according to which the kinds are human constructs. What is real is, in fact, instances of iron. And the kind of iron is a construct based on similarity and dissimilarity relations between objects. And the kinds are particular grouping drawn between objects. And this grouping or kinding is made by human. The claim, as Alexander Bird stated, is accepted by moderate or weak realists too, which argued that there are natural divisions among things such that our actual categorizations can succeed in matching those divisions or may fail to. Then, even for realists, kinding is a human practice and is based on our perspective. Then, this approach implicitly admits that theoretical kinds are human affected and entities constructed by them have some human imprints. The third similarity is that both types of entities stand in causal relations. Electrons attract protons and leave traces in a closed chamber. Similarly, money provides his owner with power and status. For example, being police enables people to stop cars and arrest people. So we have causal expectations from both theoretical and social entities, and accordingly ascribe a level of objectivity to them. These essential similarities and their relation to realism corroborate a hypothesis that perhaps our view of one type has some implications for our view of another. And for example, it is not possible to be realist about one type, theoretical entities, and be anti-realist about another, social entities. But it is not the whole story. And some controversies are yet to be discussed about mentioned similarities, which may allow us to take different stances toward these entities. I'm going to show that these similarities are somehow superficial and cannot stand further, scrutiny. Regarding to first similarities, although both realist and constructivists see human imprints on the formation of theoretical entities, but realists take a further step to exhaust that imprint and verify the correspondence between the hypothetical entity and a real one. The so-called numerical argument, for example, is a way to demonstrate that among several candidates, one of them is real. It's not the case, however, in social entities, where none of which is supposed to be real. This difference is rooted in a deeper difference regarding the way human contributes to these two types. A role which human plays to social entities is constitutive, while a role he plays to theoretical entities is causal. A piece of paper is regarded as money insofar as our collective intentionality continuously considered it as money. And as soon as we stop such attitude, the piece of paper will not be money anymore. The life and force of other institutional entities, as John Searle claims, depends similarly on our collective acceptance. In theoretical entities, but few, perhaps except strong constructivists, think that the life and force of electrons depends on our intentionality, and their causal effects will disappear if we don't recognize electrons as electrons. For example, their traces will not be observed in the closed chamber. But here we should care about the difference between epistemological and ontological aspects. For electrons to get into our epistemic world, we need to form the kind of electron. And this makes electrons being causally dependent on our intentionality. But it is not our collective intentionality that provides electrons causal power. It is physical structure of the world which is responsible for the causal power. So this case is different from money and police, whose causal power depend on our collective intentionality and the status which they have through this acceptance. The conventions related to money and the corresponding web of actions fail to work, the causal status of money will disappear too. So it can be claimed prima facie that if there are no us, then there's no money. While electrons continues to live without us, at least it is how scientific realists believe. And a case here in this talk is the scientific realist view. The result arising by this difference is that the way theoretical entities depend on our intentionality is essentially different from the way social entities depend on it. And the claim that the second type is subjective does not necessarily extend to the first type of entities. There's another related difference which goes back to the modality of the way intentionality contributes to these two types of entities. In social entities, our intentionality necessarily contributes to the being. Then we cannot imagine a situation in which mentioned entities persist without us and without our intentionality. In theoretical entities, however, it is a contingent matter. The best evidence for this contingency is that some theoretical entities, for example, genes, turn to be observational entities during the time. And regarding the third similarity, the point is that the conditions and properties ascribed to social entities are sometimes conventional and even arbitrary. Khalid's example is very illuminating. It is entirely arbitrary that which requirements are set for permanent residence and which properties are ascribed to it. You may include a particular height as a requirement, and somebody includes capacity of swimming 100 meters underwater. Whether something associated with a social kind is sometimes arbitrary, and it is these arbitrary conventions that prepare grounds for those entities, to work. But note that the claim is not that causal powers of social entities are entirely arbitrary. Insofar as we ascribe exchange value to money, particular causal powers are automatically associated. It gives power, status, etc. The claim here is that the content of above conventions and a prevailing symbolic order contribute partially to the content of causal powers of social entities. And in this sense, they can be known not to be genuine causal powers. In theoretical entities, however, we deal with genuine causal powers, and there is no such dependence and freedom. If it was the case, if causal powers depended in some way on us and our actions, then laws of nature as relations between theoretical entities and their properties would not have been laws of nature anymore. Then it seems that serious differences are involved in the way social and theoretical entities are similar. And so a tension imagined to be between anti-realism on social entities and realism on theoretical entities does not seem that much serious. And thank for your attention.